Alright, I'm Dylan Allen.
I'm Haley Brown.
I'm Emily Bryant.
And I'm Taylor DeLong, and today we are going to be discussing net neutrality.
So first we're going to start with what is net neutrality, and to describe it we have a short video that we're going to play that gives a brief overview.
Okay, so like as the video said, they kind of treat it like a highway. So with net neutrality, all of your internet users can go at the same speed regardless of whatever internet service provider they have. So all of these people have the same exact speed whenever they're doing something on the internet. As over here, so say these red cars, like car A, they have Comcast. Say they want to watch Netflix, and Netflix pays Comcast extra money. So when they stream Netflix, they have no lag and their speed is really good and they like it. So these people over here have AT&T, and let's say Netflix doesn't pay AT&T as much, but it's not as slow, so they kind of just deal with it, and they have maybe like a 5 or 10-second lag. But then these people over here, Netflix doesn't pay their internet service providers money, so they have to kind of stop. So they kind of said with using the highway, it's kind of like you have to stop and pay a toll because it's taking time out. So this could hurt them because these people are stopping and they're trying to stream Netflix, and maybe it could have a 1 or even 2 minute lag, so it's taking a long time to load, and they can get frustrated and they can go and they can either change internet service providers or they can even just cancel their Netflix subscription in the end. So so we think that net neutrality should be a thing, so this is why.
As the video mentioned, net neutrality prohibits internet service providers, or ISPs, from blocking or throttling content. It also prohibits paid prioritization of certain content providers. According to Merriam-Webster, an internet service provider is a company that provides its customers with access to the internet and may also provide other internet-related services. Internet service providers can be broadband connections like Charter and Comcast, or they can provide a wireless connection such as AT&T and Verizon.
And I also did want to point out, I did contact AT&T and Verizon, and once they found out that I wanted to talk to them about net neutrality, they stopped replying to me. So I did reach out to them, but we kind of got nowhere with that. So that was unfortunate.
Okay, so for current legislation, I'm just going to go over a timeline just to show where it started and where it is today. In the early 2000s, internet providers banned customers from using viral networks or VPNs or setting up their own Wi-Fi routers. Then in 2005, the FCC fines Madison River, South Carolina for blocking phone calls over the internet, and this was in efforts to enforce net neutrality. Then in 2008, the FCC orders Comcast to stop throttling BitTorrent connections. Comcast then in return sued them, saying that they can throttle if they want, because at this time there was no law in place saying that they couldn't. Then in 2009, Apple was caught blocking iPhone users from making Skype calls by the request of AT&T. The FCC put pressure on Apple and AT&T to allow Skype calls to go through without throttling them. Then in 2015, the FCC passes net neutrality, so there is no blocking or prioritizing certain sites. Every website and show or movie are all in the same playing field. Then in 2017, after 2 years, the FCC repealed their previous order, freeing broadband providers to block content as they see fit. Then in 2018, July 11th, the FCC's rule was put into place and net neutrality was repealed from the United States.
The media has for sure taken advantage of a lot of attention that net neutrality has been experiencing. So for a couple of examples, so there was over 1.5 million comments that were left on the proposal on the FCC website whenever they wanted to repeal it back in July. So over 1.5 million people were expressing their concerns and comments on this post. This was given that this was bigger than the Janet Jackson Super Bowl halftime show malfunction that she had in 2004 that received more attention than that scandal that occurred then. And that received over 1.8 million tweets within that few days in July whenever they proposed wanting to repeal that. So people in power are also backlashing, not just consumers and consumers like you and I, but it's also people such as the Facebook COO, the Netflix technology officer, and then Google Twitter accounts also were all tweeting and posting on social media and different platforms saying that this was a very large disappointment that net neutrality would be repealed because it's going to cause lots of issues not only for consumers but also in society and for the larger companies at large as well.
So we're going to go over 4 different regulatory theories and their applications to net neutrality. The first one we're going to discuss is competition, and then we're going to go over why regulate net neutrality. Then we're going to talk about capture theory and its relationship to net neutrality, and finally we're going to end with product regulation and net neutrality. So the first theory we're going to talk about is competition. So the concern with net neutrality and competition is the assumption that broadband and wireless internet service providers will have the capability to charge content providers for faster access if no net neutrality regulation is in place. This fast lane access would come at a premium price. Assumedly, large corporations will be able to swallow that cost, and most often without pushing it on to the consumer. The issue lies with the small and independent companies, websites, and mobile applications that won't be able to as easily digest the additional cost. This concern is not relevant for all small companies and all large corporations because each one is different, but its mere existence is of concern for the future of innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit. So we've mentioned paid prioritization a few times, and this is the idea that without net neutrality regulation, internet service providers will be able to charge content providers for faster access. The additional cost then makes for an unbalanced and unlevel playing field in which many would argue is an injustice to the entrepreneurship and innovation that our society and our country is built on. Net neutrality can be attributed to some of the success of these large internet giants we see today, such as YouTube and Netflix. These content providers did not have to pay for faster access for their consumers to view their product, nor did their competitors, and therefore their audiences were able to grow. Had broadband and wireless providers been able to throttle their content, these internet giants like Netflix and YouTube could have seen their growth stunted by bigger companies that were able to pay the additional fee for faster access. Their growth instead was due to a better quality product with greater consumer usability and not simply because it loaded the fastest for the end consumer. Essentially, the argument here that we have framed is centered around the idea of equality and the fact that a deeper pocket and a larger expense account shouldn't control the speed at which consumers are able to view a content provider's content. According to our textbook, Economics of Regulation and Antitrust, small producers are allowed to earn greater profits relative to larger firms under regulation than they would have earned in an unregulated market. So the unregulated market here is our business society without net neutrality laws in place, and then the regulated market is where net neutrality laws are in place. So therefore, based on this argument, without net neutrality regulations in place, smaller companies are at a disadvantage compared to these large companies. Tom Lee, the head of policy at Mapbox, a location platform for mobile and web applications, said that milliseconds of difference can leave you at a disadvantage when potential customers are evaluating your product. So therefore, if end consumers are seeing slower streaming speeds on certain content providers' content, this is a potential deterrent for them to no longer use the product. suggest they won't. For example, as Dylan mentioned earlier, AT&T blocked Skype and other internet calling services on iPhones until 2009, according to the MIT Technology Review. We also see another example between Netflix and Comcast. In 2014, Netflix customers who had Comcast as their internet service provider were seeing slower streaming speeds. The average Comcast streaming speed for Netflix users was 1.15 megabytes in January. Comcast swore at this time they were not throttling Netflix traffic, but the simple fact is that Netflix traffic had grown increasingly difficult to deliver on Comcast's network, while other internet service providers were not reporting similar issues. Analyst Richard Greenfield put, "How come Time Warner is showing solid Netflix performance without paid peering?" After dealing with multitudes of complaints from consumers, Netflix then decided to make a pact with Comcast and pay for a direct connection to their broadband network. Internet service providers have long wanted Netflix to pay for the bandwidth in which it is responsible for. In March of 2014, after Netflix and Comcast made their payment deal, the average Comcast delivery speed for Netflix users increased to 2.5 megabytes. Without net neutrality regulation, packs similar to the Comcast Netflix pack are likely to increase. With or without net neutrality regulation in place, the business models of many internet service providers are beginning to change. More often, internet service providers are diving into content. With this shift, these internet service providers can then provide an unfair advantage to their content over rival ones. For example, AT&T launched a new product called DirecTV Now, which lets users stream content from DirecTV, which AT&T owns, over the wireless network without it counting against their monthly data cap. This general practice of letting wireless users stream video for free is known as zero rating. The Open Internet Order from 2015 that has since been repealed allowed the FCC to have the authority to police these zero-rated services. The new administration's FCC, on the other hand, will likely encourage such products, according to the MIT Technology Review.
So next we're going to talk about why net neutrality should be regulated in the first place. So first we're going to talk about who is benefiting the most from net neutrality. So first and foremost, everyone would think of as the consumer. The consumer is obviously benefiting a great deal because the goods and services that they're used to receiving, such as their Netflix subscriptions and accessing things such as Facebook or Twitter, various social medias, without having to pay for them at the current state, or what they are paying for them isn't going to go up in an astronomical amount. So the net neutrality being in place would eliminate all of those various issues that may arise in the future, and as well as it would also help the providers with low competition. So with net neutrality in place, the competitors must stay within a certain range of what they're offering to their consumers. So whether that be like the price point or whether it be the actual good itself, they must stay within a certain range to stay desirable to the consumers. So staying within that range is leaving little room for new competitors to enter the market without them failing right away. So those larger corporations are seeing a benefit in what they are providing. Next, we're going to look at the public interest. So it's more accessible to the consumers. So keeping the interest of the consumer in mind is very crucial for obvious reasons. But making the good or service appeal to the consumer is a priority in order to keep them coming back and keeping them as a loyal customer. So eliminating the potential of extra costs for various services that they're already receiving, or the potential of growth of experiencing new products from that one specific customer is for sure crucial. For example, the public interest to access services wouldn't be questioned or hindered. So this is especially true among, like, for example, school districts. So if a low-income school district, for example, would be receiving a slower access to their internet at their school, would give less resources to their students. But then a more private institution that has a larger pocket, if you will, would then be able to have a faster internet connection and give their students better resources. That is not necessarily fair in this situation, just because it is not the students' fault for in which they are living in situations such as that. And finally, we'll look at the private interest. So we looked at this from more of a corporation standpoint, so the providers benefit. As I mentioned, with low competition, large providers and service companies have the upper hand, and it's in their best interest that net neutrality would continue being regulated for the future of their brand, keeping their customers loyal, and as well as gathering new customers in the future, and then as well as staying competitive. So in the best interest of their business, providers will stay
theory, what it is, and also it is known as regulatory capture. So according to George Stigler, under the capture theory of regulation, the regulatory agency is captured by the economic industry or interests that it serves. So our book, our textbook in class, The Economic of Antitrust and Regulation by Viscusi, stated 2 ways that capture can occur, but after doing some research, I found another article called The Capture Theory of Regulation Revisited by Etzoni, and they say that there's 5 different ways that capture can occur. So the 2 in the book are capture theory states that either regulation is supplied in response to the industry's demand for regulation. So an example of this was the legislators are captured by the industry. And then the second one is regulatory agency comes to be controlled by the industry over a period of time. So that would be like your regulators are captured by the industry. And then Viscusi also talked about the time up until 1960, saying that regulation was not strongly correlated with like the existence of market failures. So as I said, like before 1960, there was empirical regularity and some empirical evidence that I found. So a few examples that Viscusi gave are competitive industries and monopolistic industries. So your potentially competitive industries are those such as trucking and taxi cabs. So with these, regulation of those specific industries supported the prices. So like you couldn't really come in and make higher profits. It really prevented that. And then in naturally monopolistic ones, such as electric utilities, Viscusi states that there's been evidence of regulation having little effect on the price, so an above normal amount of profit was allowed to be earned. So after that, the empirical evidence that was discussed in the book supported the claim that regulation is typically pro-producer. And then after studying those empirical regularities and finding that empirical evidence, there was like a recent push for the capture theory. So, and that started with George Stigler. He really made, in the 1970s, the capture theory really well known, and he really pushed for that, and he really made it popular. And George Stigler also was a Nobel Prize economist at the University of Chicago. So, as I mentioned earlier, there was in that article that I read 6 different ways that the capture theory can occur. So the first one, lobbyists representing industries or other special interests, they play a key role in drafting the legislation. So those special interests these people have really just shape those regulations. So an example that I found of this was in the final days of the Bush administration, the U.S. Department of Transportation ended a rule that was shaped by the railroad industry, or enacted a rule. This rule allowed individual railroad companies to like change the routes for dangerous cargoes. So they could kind of like pick and choose where they wanted these dangerous trains to go in the U.S. So I thought that was neat. And then the second one was capture occurs later after rules have already been authored. So you're just kind of like diluting those existing regulations. The third is often takes place without altering the regulations on the books by weakening their enforcement. So this is just more, they're trying to weaken the enforcement of those actual regulations. So they're still in place, but they're just kind of weakened. 4, special interests have found ways to virtually eliminate existing regulations from the books. So this is just getting rid of those existing regulations in general. An example of this one is when special interests weren't able to persuade regulators to revoke or dilute the regulations that restrict behavior or to weaken enforcement. They sometimes, after the regulatory regime in their favor, by either switching the regulation to a different jurisdiction, or they kind of just get rid of it. So that goes with number 5. And then number 6 isn't really one of the main ways they talked about, but I added this in here. So like the first 5 are the main ones. And then 6 is to set prices and rates. So that's just ensuring profitability by setting those higher prices and rates that the market would otherwise provide. Okay, so how does this like all relate to net neutrality? So after talking with my group and kind of just looking into this more in theory, it's those people that are really the high users, they would want this, because if you don't have net neutrality, like your high users are going to be paying more essentially. So those high user consumers are really trying to capture the industry, but you can't really do this in like an organized way. It's more of, you can't really go and lobby for this at all the time because there's no really organized way of doing this. So an example that we talked about with Dave, even if a user needs like 2,000 megabytes of speed or even 100 megabytes of speed, like everyone will be treated the same. So these consumers are going to have an incentive to try and get a lower cost for them because they are high users. Because everyone has to pay the same price for internet service providers, and the amount of usage doesn't really matter in the end. Therefore, it's going to benefit the consumer. So this is just like a level playing field, and all of the consumers are going to be treated the same. But although these big companies really want the ability to like spread this out and kind of make it an oligopolistic type of market, but these consumers, even your high user consumers, really think that your internet service should be treated like a public utility. So like your electric, like I talked about earlier, kind of with that one price fits all. So a couple things that I looked into is when the Obama administration got into office, they were really for one size fits all, but by this time, like your lobbyists weren't really having a lot of impact on this because they kind of already had their mind made up for that. And then there was capture going on until this administration changed, and now, as Dylan discussed earlier, the FCC recently repealed net neutrality. So with our administration now, they don't really think that one size fits all is the best way. So, as stated previously, in theory, the consumer isn't really paying more for their internet services. They just have like slower speeds for different streaming providers that aren't paying those ISPs more money.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about product regulation. And as Taylor said before, the main goal of net neutrality is one size fits all. Net neutrality is put back into effect. Service providers won't be able to have different service packages. Every website, movie, or show will run at the same speed. Without net neutrality, the service provider can regulate the product as they see fit. By regulating the product, it costs the consumer more in theory. For example, if Netflix, HBO, or Hulu have to pay more to get better internet speed, it will increase the price of the subscription. A real-world example would be that T-Mobile currently allows you to use Apple Music and Spotify without using any of your personal data, and it gives you the best internet speed, and they throttle all other music providers that you may have on your phone. And then in conclusion, net neutrality offers a level playing field for everyone. It protects the customer from being charged more, as I said before, and it allows the customer to view any site, movie, show at the same speed. That's it. Anybody have any questions?